Imagine a powerful ruler, one of the most influential figures of his time, suddenly stripped of his humanity, crawling on all fours, eating grass, and living like a wild animal. Today, we're diving into one of the Bible's most mysterious and captivating stories, the transformation of a mighty king into a beast. This is exactly what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar, the fearsome ruler of Babylon, in a shocking twist of fate that changed his life forever. But what could have led to such a dramatic downfall? Why would God allow this powerful monarch to descend into madness and live like a creature of the field? And perhaps most importantly, what can this ancient story teach us about pride, humility, and recognizing divine power in our lives today? Nebuchadnezzar's journey is more than just a story. It's a profound lesson about human nature, the limits of worldly power, and the powerful ways God intervenes to reveal essential truths. Before we dive into the details of Nebuchadnezzar's transformation, let's first get a sense of who he was and why his story has such significance in the Bible. King Nebuchadnezzar II ruled the Babylonian Empire from roughly 605 to 562 BC, and during his reign, Babylon reached the peak of its power, becoming one of the most famous empires in history. Known for his military prowess, architectural achievements, and the sheer scope of his rule, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just an ordinary king. He was a conqueror who expanded Babylon's boundaries through relentless military campaigns, gaining control over a vast territory. Among his most famous accomplishments was the construction of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This legendary garden, though its existence is debated by historians, has come to symbolize the grandeur and luxury of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar's rule. He also rebuilt much of Babylon itself, transforming it into an awe-inspiring city with formidable walls, temples, and palaces that showcased the power and wealth of his empire. In addition to being a great builder, Nebuchadnezzar was also a ruthless conqueror who expanded his kingdom by subjugating many neighboring nations, including Judah, the kingdom of God's chosen people. In 586 BC, he led a campaign to destroy Jerusalem, the sacred city of the Jewish people. His army tore down Jerusalem's protective walls, burned down the temple, Israel's center of worship, and took the Israelites into captivity, an event that came to be known as the Babylonian exile. This event marked a significant turning point in biblical history, fulfilling God's repeated warnings to the Israelites about the consequences of disobedience and rebellion. For the Jewish people, the destruction of Jerusalem and their forced exile to Babylon was both a tragedy and a divine judgment, forever changing the course of their history and solidifying Nebuchadnezzar's role as one of the Bible's central antagonists. 2 Kings 24 verses 10 to 16. 2 Kings 25 verses 1 to 21. Yet what makes Nebuchadnezzar truly remarkable in biblical history is not just his power or his conquests. It's his relationship with the God of Israel and the extraordinary events that unfolded as he encountered the divine. Despite being a pagan king who worshipped many gods and ruled over an empire steeped in idolatry, Nebuchadnezzar experienced several life-altering encounters with the true God, the God of Israel. His interactions with the Jewish exiles, especially Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, give us a window into his character and his spiritual journey. Through these encounters, Nebuchadnezzar's story becomes not just a tale of pride and punishment, but a story of revelation and transformation. Although he initially worshipped a pantheon of Babylonian deities, Nebuchadnezzar's repeated encounters with the God of Israel ultimately led him on a path of self-discovery and, eventually, a humbling recognition of God's sovereignty. The first of Nebuchadnezzar's encounters with God's power is recorded in the book of Daniel. This interaction begins when Nebuchadnezzar is troubled by a dream, a vision so disturbing that it disrupts his peace and leaves him desperate for answers. He summons all of Babylon's magicians, enchanters, and wise men, but none of them can interpret the dream's meaning. It is then that Daniel, a young Hebrew captive, steps forward. Though he's not a Babylonian magician, Daniel possesses an extraordinary gift, a divine ability to interpret dreams given to him by the God of Israel. In Daniel chapter 2, Daniel reveals to Nebuchadnezzar the meaning of a vision of a massive statue made of different metals, each representing different kingdoms. Daniel boldly informs the king that his power and accomplishments are not the result of his own doing, but have been granted by the God of heaven. Daniel says, "Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory." Daniel 2, verses 37 to 38. This statement is a pivotal moment because it establishes that Nebuchadnezzar's authority is not self-derived, but has been given to him by God, reminding him, and all of us, that the rise and fall of leaders and empires are ultimately in God's hands. Romans 13, verse 1. But with great power often comes great pride, and Nebuchadnezzar's story is no exception. As his empire flourished and he achieved monumental successes, Nebuchadnezzar's heart became increasingly filled with pride. Like so many rulers in history, he began to see his achievements as a reflection of his own strength and wisdom, rather than as blessings from God. He started attributing all of Babylon's glory and power to himself, falling into the age-old trap of self-exaltation. One of the most striking examples of Nebuchadnezzar's pride is his reaction to the defiance of Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When these three men refuse to bow down to a golden image Nebuchadnezzar has erected, he becomes enraged by their perceived disobedience and orders them to be thrown into a fiery furnace. Despite this punishment, God miraculously saves them from the flames. Yet Nebuchadnezzar still doesn't fully grasp the depth of God's power and authority. Though he acknowledges God as a deity who can save, his heart remains unrepentant, and pride continues to rule his mind. Daniel 3 verses 28 to 29. Nebuchadnezzar's second encounter with God's power occurs in another vivid and troubling dream, as described in Daniel chapter 4. This dream was unlike anything he had experienced before, filling him with dread and an overwhelming sense of unease. As was his custom, he called upon Babylon's wise men, magicians, and astrologers to interpret the vision, but once again, they were unable to provide any insight. This recurring inability of Babylon's experts to interpret divine messages highlights the Bible's consistent theme. Human wisdom and power are ultimately limited when faced with the mysteries of God. Finally, Daniel is summoned. By now, Nebuchadnezzar recognizes Daniel's unique abilities, referring to him as Belteshazzar, a Babylonian name given to Daniel that associates him with the Babylonian gods. However, Nebuchadnezzar respects Daniel's God-given insight, sensing that there is something truly divine within him. In this second dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees a massive tree standing in the center of the earth. This tree is no ordinary tree. It reaches the heavens, is visible to the ends of the earth, and provides food and shelter for all the creatures below. Its leaves are lush and beautiful. Its fruit is abundant, and animals of every kind take refuge in its shade. This majestic tree, as Daniel explains, represents Nebuchadnezzar himself and his vast kingdom. Babylon, at that time, was the world's superpower, ruling over numerous nations and resources. The tree is a symbol of Nebuchadnezzar's influence, prosperity, and security, towering over other kingdoms and giving shelter to those within its reach. Yet, as the dream progresses, the image of the great tree takes a dark turn. Nebuchadnezzar sees a heavenly messenger, a watcher or holy one, descend from heaven and proclaim in a loud voice, "Cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it, and the birds from its branches." Daniel 4 verses 13 to 14. The dream continues with the order to leave the tree's stump and roots in the ground, bound with iron and bronze. Daniel interprets this as a sign that Nebuchadnezzar will lose his mind and be stripped of his royal dignity, living as an animal until he acknowledges God's sovereignty over all kingdoms. Daniel is visibly disturbed by the interpretation of the dream, as he foresees Nebuchadnezzar's impending downfall. With a heavy heart, Daniel warns Nebuchadnezzar that he will be driven away from society, forced to live with the wild animals, eating grass like cattle and being exposed to the elements. 7 periods of time will pass, Daniel says, until Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. Daniel 4 verses 24 to 25. Daniel then appeals to Nebuchadnezzar to repent, urging him to turn from his pride, help the oppressed, and seek humility. He offers the king a path to redemption, suggesting that if he changes his ways, his prosperity might continue. Tragically, however, Nebuchadnezzar does not heed Daniel's warning. A year later, as he walks on the roof of his royal palace, he looks over Babylon and makes a prideful declaration, saying, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Daniel 4 verse 30. At that very moment, a voice from heaven speaks, proclaiming that his royal authority has been taken from him. Immediately, Nebuchadnezzar's mind is struck, and he is driven from society. The great king who once ruled over vast lands is reduced to living like a beast, eating grass, and losing his human dignity as his hair grows long and his nails become like claws. Daniel 4 verses 31 to 33. This powerful and humbling scene demonstrates the seriousness with which God views human pride and self-exaltation. Nebuchadnezzar's transformation into a creature of the field serves as a vivid reminder of the dangers of elevating ourselves and failing to acknowledge God's hand in our lives. His drastic shift from royal splendor to an animal-like existence shows us just how easily pride can bring even the most powerful among us to ruin. For 7 long years, Nebuchadnezzar lived in this reduced state, a symbolic period that not only stripped him of his kingdom and dignity, but forced him to confront his dependence on something far greater than himself. This time in the wilderness wasn't merely a punishment. It was a journey of spiritual awakening designed to break his pride and help him understand a profound truth. True sovereignty belongs to God alone. In every moment he spent living like a wild animal, Nebuchadnezzar was learning, painfully but necessarily, that earthly power is fragile and that human pride, left unchecked, blinds us to the reality of God's authority. Finally, after 7 years, the powerful moment of realization arrives. Nebuchadnezzar lifts his eyes to heaven, acknowledging the sovereignty of the God who rules over all. In that instant, his sanity is restored, and he returns to his former self, but now with a transformed heart. No longer does he boast of his own accomplishments. Instead, he praises and glorifies the Almighty, saying, "His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation." Daniel 4 verses 34 to 35. This shift in Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, from one of arrogant pride to one of humble reverence, marks the true transformation in his story. The once proud king, who once believed himself to be the architect of his own success, now recognizes that every achievement and all power ultimately belong to God. This restored relationship not only redeems him but also opens his eyes to the reality that earthly empires are temporary, but God's reign is eternal. Nebuchadnezzar's humility before God allows him to reclaim his throne with a new understanding and a heart changed forever by this profound experience. Nebuchadnezzar's story remains a timeless lesson for us all, urging us to remember that pride blinds us to God's role in our lives and can easily lead to our downfall. When we exalt ourselves and place our achievements above God's grace and guidance, we risk losing sight of our true purpose and becoming consumed by illusions of self-importance. This ancient narrative reminds us that all we have is ultimately a gift from God, and that without His hand upon us, we are nothing. Yet, this story is also filled with hope and redemption. God's discipline, though often painful, is meant to redeem and humble us, not to destroy us. Just as Nebuchadnezzar's sanity and kingdom were restored when he finally humbled himself, so too can we find restoration, peace, and purpose when we acknowledge God's sovereignty in our own lives. Nebuchadnezzar's journey from pride to humility serves as a powerful reminder that true greatness lies not in our own accomplishments, but in our willingness to submit to the Creator who holds all power. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the story of Nebuchadnezzar. If you found value in exploring this remarkable transformation, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more in-depth biblical insights. Leave a comment below to share the lesson that resonated most with you from Nebuchadnezzar's story, and feel free to share this video to encourage others to learn from the powerful wisdom it holds. May God bless you, and remember, the path to true greatness lies not in seeking our own glory, but in embracing humility and recognizing the ultimate sovereignty of our Almighty Creator.